to this online event on Scotland's natural capital land-based opportunities in a green recovery. Can I, first of all, I need to inform you that we don't have video. We are working on that, and we will get that fixed, I hope, during the event. So if you suddenly see faces appearing, don't be scared. But first of all, can I start by acknowledging your time commitment to this, especially during the pandemic? It's quite fatiguing, particularly for those who are doing many online meetings. But this is a very important topic, and the urgency in dealing with the dual crisis for our climate and nature means that what we do today we think is really important. So thank you very much for coming along, and thank you for submitting questions in advance as well. I think it's even more important that we do work collectively and share ideas and drive the agenda to take action. And our panel represent very different perspectives across environment, wildlife, agriculture and the business sectors. And it's fantastic to have these panelists. And they're going to be talking about three interconnecting SDG themes. So we have Joe Pike, Chief Executive, Scottish Wildlife Trust, talking about Biosphere. Hannah White, Executive at the Green Investment Group, talking about economy, and introducing Professor Wayne Powell, Chief Executive of Scotland's Rural College, who's going to talk in relation to society. And fourth, we have Deborah Long, Chief Officer at Scottish Environment Link, and she's chosen Biosphere. And finally, Alan Thornborough, Director of Scotland Business and the Community, who's picked the economy. So big thank you to all of those panel members. They're each going to have 3 minutes to talk to you. And this is in the context of green recovery. I think this is something there's a big appetite to learn more about. And what we want to do is identify what we see as being possibly the top 5 opportunities that arise from protecting and enhancing our stock of natural assets, and to foster a more sustainable well-being economy. And we want to produce at the end of this an output. It could be, for example, an infographic of those top 5 opportunities that can inform thinking on what Scotland's great opportunities are in terms of its land-based natural capital and how these opportunities can be realised in a green recovery. So each panel will take a 3-minute presentation, putting their ideas and perspectives across, and then we'll open this up for discussion. We have, as I said, questions already posed in advance, but you can add more in the chat function, or simply pose an opinion or an observation, add any useful information or evidence, links, for example. And we've got Rory and Bruce are operating as moderators, and they'll feed those questions to me separately, and I'll pose them on your behalf. Our intention is to take all the creative ideas and reflections and discuss how we can produce these in an infographic that can communicate, raise awareness, and influence the thoughts of decision makers and advisors. Now, just to start off with, the way in the forum we define natural capital, it's as the stock of natural assets, which include geology, soil, air, water, and all living things. That's a lot to cover in 3 minutes. And 3 minutes is an interesting and challenging time, and I'd ask speakers obviously try and keep to that as much as possible. Now, what I'm about to say is not meant as a warning, but on average, you will die in 3 minutes if you don't breathe fresh air. If you don't drink fresh water, it's 3 days. And if you don't eat food, it's 3 weeks. I could add in the disbenefits of being disconnected from people and nature, and our pandemic has amply demonstrated that for us. But fortunately in Scotland, we have abundant fresh air, abundant water and food. And on top of wonderful landscapes, educated and resourceful people, we are very fortunate. But somehow we're still over-consuming and degrading our wonderful natural capital. So how can we make better opportunities that use our natural capital more wisely? So panel members, we look forward to your introductions, and please, everyone, remember to breathe. So can I start off by introducing Joe Pike to address us on Biosphere? Joe.
Thanks very much, Colin. So this year marks the beginning of the UN's Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. And the reason that the UN has made this designation is in recognition that the world won't be able to achieve any of the Sustainable Development Goals if we don't tackle the nature crisis. Now, fortunately in Scotland, the government has recognised that a healthy natural environment is fundamental to a healthy, resilient economy. And the major report published recently by Professor Sapata Das-Gupta recognises that our economies, livelihoods and well-being all depend on our most precious asset, nature. So, in Scotland, I think the biggest land-based opportunity that will deliver for a green recovery and support the biosphere is innovative multi-stakeholder partnerships focused on ecosystem restoration at a landscape scale. And there are 3 reasons why I believe that this is the case. Innovative, because we need to build on tried and tested ways of doing things and augment these with the addition of new solutions that deliver for nature as well as for jobs, skills and society more widely. We need system change, and this includes finding new forms of financing to accelerate the pace of that change. Multi-stakeholder, well, that's because everyone needs to be part of the solution and everyone needs to see the benefits, whether it's communities, landowners, local businesses, local authorities, stakeholders at every level. And finally, why change at a landscape scale? Because that's what's needed to make ecosystems more resilient, and we urgently need to scale up for transformative change. One example of an innovative multi-stakeholder partnership focused on large-scale ecological restoration is Riverwoods. Since 2019, the Scottish Wildlife Trust has been working alongside a range of partners, including Nature's Scot, SEPA, the Tweed Forum, Con4, the James Hutton Institute, Scottish Water, Abundance Investment, and several others to develop this initiative. The key purpose of Riverwoods is to create a network of thriving riverbank woodlands and healthy river systems across the whole of Scotland. This will deliver a range of benefits, including carbon capture, flood protection, improved water quality, and water cooling, which will benefit salmon fisheries, as well as the whisky industry. So finally, the biggest barrier to enabling this opportunity, well, if I can be a little bit controversial, and this applies in Scotland and in every country of the world, I think the biggest barrier is a lack of political will. A lack of political will to create the enabling conditions to help innovative multi-stakeholder partnerships succeed in delivering ecosystem restoration at scale and at pace. The pandemic has demonstrated that where there is political will, action can be mobilised on an unprecedented scale. That's what we need now in Scotland, through everything from the transformation of land management subsidies, the creation of a Scottish nature network, successful development of land use frameworks, to a wider coherence and momentum in order to deliver a truly green recovery. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joe. That was excellent. And can I introduce the second speaker, Hannah White? Hannah, on the economy.
Thanks, Colin. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a real, it's a real great opportunity for me to come and sit and listen and learn, as well as hopefully contribute a bit from the private sector. So I work at the Green Investment Group, and in that group, I sit on the Green Investment Ratings team. And our team has the job of rating all the transactions that come through the group and rate them using sort of an in-house methodology against 5 green purposes that have been set for the group that each transaction must meet. So this includes reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, promotion of sustainable use of natural resources, protection and enhancement of the natural environment, protection and enhancement of biodiversity, and the promotion of environmental sustainability. So really interested about this conversation today, because during my short time at the group so far, it's quite clear that there's quite a bias towards sort of one of the green purposes being the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and the group are interested in seeing sort of more projects come through that satisfy those other green purposes, such as the sustainable use of natural resources and the protection and enhancement of the natural environment. And yes, hearing all the opportunities discussed today will certainly help sort of open up those opportunities a bit more. So going on to what I think the sort of biggest opportunity in Scotland is at the moment, I believe that there is a great opportunity to deliver effective green recovery and realise the high value of Scotland's land through nature-based projects that are structured in a dynamic way that can ensure both long-term financial returns and environmental benefits. I think Scotland has a great opportunity to learn from lessons from the sectors such as wind and solar and energy storage about the benefits of dynamically structured financial transactions that can deliver long-term financial returns, as well as deliver those environmental benefits that we need to see a successful green recovery come through. There's, in terms of barriers to seeing this opportunity, I think it would be really interesting if we could tackle the need to baseline Scotland's land in a robust and scientific way, giving the data that's needed to build into the different models that we would need to create to ensure that we can see long-term revenues come through in a clear and easy to understand way that can be transferred to the private sector. That's me. Thank you, Colin.
No, thanks, Hannah. That was perfect timing again. So on to our third presentation, and this is from Professor Wayne Powell. Wayne, over to you.
Thank you, Colin, and good morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah.
Okay, thanks everyone. So very briefly, this is a very interesting essay question, and I'm proposing that there should be a focus on food systems, and I'd like to go on and elaborate on why I think this is important. The first reason why I think this is important is that it's a major integrator between many of the areas we'll be covering today. So for example, society, there's an increasing demand from society to be able to have access and to be able to consume healthy, sustainable food. There's also a major focus on localism and on circularity in terms of the way in which we use natural resources. The second reason, of course, it is absolutely critical to the biosphere and to the net zero agenda, to sustaining biodiversity, and indeed the biogeochemistry of our planet, which is so important. Third, it's really important for business, because business are going to need to meet the needs of a more discerning customer that is going to want to have quality and is also going to have to ensure that that quality is underpinned by outstanding environmental and sustainability credentials. The fourth reason is that I think Scotland has a comparative advantage. As a comparative advantage in terms of the natural economy, in terms of natural capital, but this opportunity of food system offers an opportunity to kind of catalyze and integrate some of those asset-based approaches with the needs of society and consumers. And lastly, it spans both urban and rural communities. So it is a genuine integrator. Just to conclude, Colin, very briefly, I think there are a couple of things that we're doing at SIUC. The first is that we've had a major shift in strategy to create a new breed of university, which has the sustainable natural economy at its heart. There are three defining factors in terms of this strategy. One is a tertiary institution. Second is a place focus. And third, a big focus on purpose and values around innovation, jobs and skills, and co-design of some of those solutions. In terms of challenges, of course, challenges are opportunities as well. And that is in terms of behavior and in terms of ensuring that we have the human capital with the skills to be able to use some of the innovation that some of our previous speakers have referred to. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wayne. So on to our next speaker is Deborah Long. Deborah.
Thanks, Colin. I'm just going to go back to basics and start off to explain what nature means to our members. We've got 40 members in Link. And when we talk about nature, we mean the ecosystems that exist on land, at sea, and in our communities. And when we say nature, we mean every aspect of the natural world, whether that's the natural support systems we all need to survive, and Colin's already mentioned the clean air and water, or healthy, productive soils and seas, or even thriving nature that's accessible to us all in cities and rural areas and just cheers us up. But we don't capitalise that in our work. We see the moral and ethical value as well as the economic value, and we work together towards protecting all of those values. That makes it very complicated, but it also makes it totally inspiring. So I was challenged to give one example of a land-based opportunity in Scotland that could deliver for a green recovery. And the biggest opportunity in my view is a nature network. Joe has already mentioned a nature network, and I just wanted to give a little bit more detail on it. There's an easy and enjoyable way to find out what we mean. We've got a short film on our website, and I'll post the link in a little bit. But I would just summarise that by saying a nature network isn't just a hedgerow or a field boundary, or even a woodland or an area of peatland. It's any ecosystem that's connected to another bit of the same ecosystem through which species can mix and mate. It might be any one of the above, but it might also just be stands of plants that are within flying distance of their key pollinators or simply downwind. It might be trees and woodland within the travelling distance of a red squirrel or a speckled wood butterfly. And there are opportunities for nature networks everywhere across Scotland. For nature, the benefits are that species can move and increase. For people, we can see these species as they move around, and nature finds ways to come into and through towns and cities. For our health, access to nature improves mental and physical health, and functioning ecosystems can limit the spread of disease. We only have to look at COVID, or here in Scotland, in fact, Lyme's disease. And it also brings decent work. We'll need different skills and more jobs to deliver one. It sounds idyllic, but actually it's a necessity. Nature isn't doing well in Scotland like the rest of the planet, and that part of our natural capital is in decline. And with today's pressures on nature, the benefits of connecting nature up are massive, but also invaluable to people and business. The pandemic has taught us that nature calms. More people have come into contact with nature on their doorstep and recognised it as the way that makes them feel better. To put it another way, a nature network would help us meet our sustainable development goals in Scotland, and it would act to at least 4 of them on land, health, sustainable communities and decent work. The biggest barriers, I think, are the lack of tools and fragmented policy. We need national mapping tools in wide use that enable land managers to join up action for particular species and habitats over distances and over boundaries. We need initiatives that bring people together to develop and deliver joint projects across wide areas. And we need a national plan that prioritises species and habitats across boundaries. The second barrier I see is a lack of coordination. Our members can show the huge benefits of habitat and species restoration, but without the coordination needed, these projects remain isolated. It's much like our nature reserves and protected areas. They're not joined up because it's not a priority yet. And this lack of vision means that land managers and land users aren't enthused and supported to come together to develop projects together. So in terms of what needs to be done, we need to work out what can be done where, and this has already started. The James Hutton Institute, Plant Life and Bug Life have all provided tools to identify what could be done where to restore vital habitats, species populations and ecosystem services. And the impacts are already being demonstrated in SWT and RSPB landscape scale projects, for example. But it all needs to be brought together. By working together in partnerships and through a planning system that incorporates the green and the blue infrastructure alongside the grey. And if we do this, we could step up the types and scales of activities in ways that benefit more nature, more local communities, and more local businesses. That's me.
That's lovely, Deborah. Thanks very much. Yeah, I've got a lot of inspiration in there, and I think that's something we'll come back to in the discussion, is about the inspiration that nature can provide. Let's move on then to the last speaker, is Alan Thornborough. Alan, over to you for an economy.
Thanks, Colin, and thank you to Ruchir and Bruce and Rory working behind the scenes to get videos and things working. I know that's a bit high stakes when you're just about to launch a webinar. None of it works, so well done to you folks for pulling all that off. And good morning to everybody. It's really good to at least be in the same virtual space as you. I'd like to talk about 2 things. One is head and the other one is heart, if I may. So a reiteration of what everybody said, I think makes enormous sense. And there's 2 things, as I say, I've mentioned there. I'll start with head. So we've got nearly 1,400 businesses signed up to the Race to Zero campaign. That's 25% of all CO2 emissions and 50% of GDP. Global assets under management for ESG investing topped $40 trillion last year. And we know there is interest in all corners to be more sustainable. But what does it really mean and how do you unpack it? So I think there's a couple of things I'd like to say about that. One is there's no shortage of organisations in the private sector signing up to commitments. If I might be a wee bit controversial and say it's quite easy to do so in lots of cases, that's not universally true. But the worry is, and the barrier inherent is, it's far away. And it's something that you'll get to later. And I think we all know only too well, we simply don't have that luxury of time. So what will be the action plans in the next 12 months, for example, to deliver on your 20, 30, 40, 50 strategies? to decarbonise, and how are nature-based solutions integral to that? So I guess from my perspective, the biggest opportunity is following the money. So, you know, Scotland and the UK is a major, I suppose, market for asset owners, asset managers and others. And Dasgupta talks about us having effectively an asset management problem. So if that is the case, what are the product systems, markets, processes that will catalyse people and investors to invest in nature-based solutions? The second thing I'd like to talk about ever so briefly, and again, very happy to talk about all of this, is I don't know if anybody can see, I've got a book I'm holding up here, Love Letter to the Earth by Thich Nhat Hanh. And for those that don't know him, he was instrumental around a lot of the aspiration to bring peace to the Vietnam during the Vietnamese War. But the core of it is that he suggests real change will happen only when we fall in love with our planet. Only love can show us how to live in harmony with nature and with each other and save us from the devastating effects of environmental destruction and climate change. And so these two things are not different in my mind. Yes, we need all these systems, processes, collaborations, political intent, products, markets and all the rest of it. But fundamentally, we've discovered something, or perhaps rediscovered something through this pandemic. And that is perhaps a reappreciation of nature, of localism, and of the benefits, I think, that many have spoken of in being in nature. Without that, and without a real sense of our interconnectivity, I think that's our biggest barrier, actually, is seeing environment as something that's other, seeing it as something you do after profits, or you do for a bit of your strategic portfolio, when we know that isn't the case. So I would argue there are two challenges. There's one of systems, products and markets around capital and following the money, and that seems sensible. And the other one is how you help people fall back in love with nature if they've fallen out of love or haven't discovered it yet.
Thanks, Alan. That's very, very interesting, and it's great to see everybody now as well. Hopefully you can see the video links now. So we've heard from our panelists, and now it's an opportunity to ask questions of the panel. We've had some great questions in advance. You can also pose questions on the chat. We'll pick them up and sort through them. We'd like to try and distribute the questions across the different SDGs, for example. But we've got a great question to start off with for all of you, actually. And it's from Julian Pace, and it says, if you had 5 minutes with a philanthropist, global investor, what would be the one thing you would like to ask them to support what would help Scotland's natural capital contribute to the world's net zero targets and also create jobs in Scotland? Now, before you pitch that, because everybody's going to write down what you say, I want to maybe just go to Alan and Hannah and ask the question, what advice would you give to people if they were pitching to a philanthropist? Alan, Hannah, do you want to answer?
If you want to go first, Alan.
Yeah, I'm happy to try. I think what I hear overwhelmingly is there's no lack of capital, and there's an issue with making projects scalable and accessible to the levels of capital that exist. So I think that would probably be where my interests lie, and I've got to disclose a wee bit of self-interest because I spent quite a lot of time in and around investment management. But I think that's where there is a disconnect. There are not necessarily the projects at a size and scale we often hear, whether that's true or not, that will help catalyse investment into nature-based recovery. So that would be the area I would focus on.
Yeah, and Hannah?
Yeah, I would echo that. It's been something that I have written down here to mention is that sort of scalable opportunity. And it seems to be something that, is constantly referred to as a barrier. But I think for Scotland, it's a really interesting aspect, because I think there is an opportunity to scale up projects in Scotland with the sort of current state of the land and the carbon sink aspect. So the opportunity maybe does exist here, and it could be sort of maybe looked into a bit more and bigged up in a way.
Okay, thanks. And so maybe just to hear some ideas around the pitch, maybe go to Joe, Deborah and Wayne. What would you say? I mean, you don't have 5 minutes, by the way, you've got 1 minute. What would be the key things that you would say that would get that philanthropist funding your vision?
Well, I think what I would say, Colin, is I would really echo what Alan has said, that if we want to unlock much greater sums of money to deliver much greater benefit across Scotland, there's a gap between where we are now and when that all kicks in. So I think even philanthropists coming in and prepared to shoulder some of the risk and share some of that risk to help foster innovation in these multi-stakeholder, innovative landscape scale projects, that's what I would prioritise.
Yeah, and Deborah?
I would say, well, where's your ambition, to be honest? Net zero is only half of the equation. Any action we need to take also needs to be nature positive. So I would say, let's look at nature positive, net zero, and involving young people, because younger generations know that the legacy we're handing on to them isn't a great one. So they're fully aware of that and they want to get involved. So my pitch would be a programme across Scotland that looks at investing in a suite of projects that can meet those three aims and can provide the skills and training that are going to be needed in the future, but also gives the inspiration and the way in for younger people to be involved.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah.
Work, for example.
Wayne, you had any opportunities recently to pitch to a philanthropist?
All the time, Colin, all the time. So, you know, I'm not so well versed in these areas as others on this call, but I think there's a couple of things I'd want to say. I mean, I think one is that we've got to be able to sell a story, and we've got to be able to sell that story around the fact that we're dealing now with huge amounts of uncertainty. And therefore, there's an appetite, I think, to be exploring these areas. The points I suppose I'd want to make, Colin, though, is that if we go back to land use in Scotland, it's really diverse. It's not just one canvas, which makes it both interesting to potential investors, but also challenging. So therefore, I think there has to be an element about this and where we can introduce some of the localism around it. And some of the areas where the things such as ecosystem services and the return on investments really have a regional presence and a regional part to it. So there's be others who are better placed to give the specific examples, but those would be, I think, the principles I'd want to talk about, Colin, is what the opportunities are, the diversity within Scotland, and then therefore, because of that diversity, it can bring into it quite a lot of resilience. I think there is a major opportunity, though. I think one of the panelists mentioned earlier on COVID, of course, and the root of COVID is zoonoses. So I think there is an opportunity around biosecurity. And what about the opportunities for ecosystem services and support for biosecurity going forward? And I think that would be an area that I'd explore. But I'm sure there's others with far more, specific, in-depth understanding of that. But that's what I'd want to say.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay. So we do hear a lot of talk about people, lots of capital being available, people with real goodwill to do something good. But I wonder how do we stop competing visions from getting in the way of each other? Is there a way we can come up with a unified vision which would help? Can I ask a panel member to address that? How do we get galvanized action together in a collective way? You want to have a go at that one? I mean, you've each presented a kind of a vision. So, I mean, Wayne, you've given one about the kind of food systems being the centre of that. But some people might argue that there's fibre as well, and as a natural product, and also there's maybe land that shouldn't be used for any product. So, how do we stop visions, getting in the way of each other and getting the action that we want?
Yeah, it's a good question, Colin. I think that the point I tried to make in my introduction, and maybe I could emphasize it now, is I think it's about co-design. So I think it's about really not pretending that we have all of the answers, but thinking about how we can co-design. And I think the opportunity for Scotland, particularly as a relatively small country, with the connectivity that we have to co-design, is world class. So, how do we bring government? How do we bring business? How do we bring communities together to co-design some of these options and opportunities? I think is where the sweet spot is. But it does require a mindset. You know, we've got to really be shifting the emphasis from competition to collaboration and really thinking about the common good. And I think, but it is a big opportunity, but I think we've got to really accelerate that going forward.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. Any other thoughts on this? Do we need a much bigger vision, which is a Scotland fully restored and regenerated in terms of nature?
If I could come in on that, Colin, I would say very much so. And I think it's a point Wayne mentioned that, you know, the power of storytelling is grossly underestimated. The multitude of, you know, sort of stakeholders on this call today, you know, are all kind of united, I'm sure, behind a pretty common purpose. But where's that overarching story? Where's the, you know, what are we trying to achieve, by when and how, and who can own which bit of, you know, a system? I know it's while, you know, it's very easy to sort of talk about that, but it's very difficult to deliver it. You've mentioned, you know, it is competing visions, and, you know, all of us have to an extent got a thing we want to achieve. But it, you know, how do you create the conditions to sort of put the, like Martin Valenti often talks about putting the holsters down. And he's right, you know, he's right. How do you come together truly around a common vision, and who's going to help drive that? So, yeah, probably I'm not sure I added much there other than just to reiterate it's a good idea.
Okay, Joe or Deborah, Hannah, anything you want to add to that?
Just really briefly to echo what's been said, but I think it's about giving people a stake in the success of what we're doing. You know, if we can give as many people as possible a stake in what we're trying to achieve, then people will achieve it on their own terms. And I think that's what we have to try to work towards. Okay,
Hannah or Deborah?
And one thing I would very briefly add is that now is the moment. You know, we need to do it now. And David Attenborough's trying, but even David Attenborough he's not getting there. So I just wanted to kind of underline that now is definitely the time, and co-creation and bringing people along and using the younger generation, I think, is absolutely key. Working with them.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, my experience of speaking to investors, you have to hit them in the emotions as well as the pocket. So I would agree with that. Hannah, is that true?
Well, I wouldn't know about that, but yeah, I think that it's an interesting point. But I think it's a really and that there's sort of lots of chat about it at the moment, and I think it's great to see that there's lots of that coming together, sort of with financial institutions, governments, leading corporates. It's a real sort of global time for sort of busyness, and there's lots of these sort of talk shops happening, but you can see real solid examples of work coming through that is probably going to sort of result in good things happening with everybody coming together and talking. And I think that's where that sort of competition issue needs to be resolved in those forums that have already been established.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. What I would say to all of everybody attending this, if you have got inspiring stories, put a link into the chat, and we want to capture all these kind of things. There is nothing like a story when it comes to talking to investors, and the forum have been talking a lot about this recently. So, and I know Environment Link are very keen on this as well. So, if you are aware of great inspiring stories across Scotland, let us know about them. They can all help to pull together a bigger story. So, please do that. I'd like to make sure we do cover some of the questions in some of the other areas, and got quite I guess a challenging question in relation to the biosphere. We always talk about our Scotland's great natural capital, but this question from Paul Walton, RSPB Scotland, is Scotland's natural capital asset index has increased over recent years, and we're all very proud that we've got a national performance framework and an indicator that looks at this. But the reality is a lot of state of nature report shows our biodiversity is still declining. So how can we ensure that having this indicator is not going to distract focus from wider biodiversity, and have we got it right? I guess Joe or Deborah might want to comment on these, or Wayne.
Yeah, no, certainly happy to give a non-technical answer. I remember asking this question of somebody a few years ago, actually, and they gave me a very good answer, and I wish I could remember what it was, and it was a technical one. So I don't pretend to be able to give a technical one, but what I would say is that we know that looking at any single metric in isolation can be dangerous. So we know this from climate change. If we look at everything through a carbon lens, there can be unintended consequences for biodiversity, and we absolutely need to tackle the two together. So I think that's the first point. I think the second point is that, you know, even if natural capital assets are increasing, they may not be increasing nearly enough to kickstart the recovery of nature that we so urgently need. And of course, biodiversity and natural capital are not synonymous. Natural capital is about looking at the value that we derive from the natural environment economically for society, but there are lots of aspects of biodiversity that it's extremely difficult to place a monetary value on. So I think I would just advocate not looking at anything in isolation, and all of these things should inform decisions, but should not actually make decisions.
Yeah, okay. Deborah, any thoughts on that one?
I would just quickly add that, again, this is non-technical, but from my perspective, Joe's made a key point there. Nature is not natural capital, and natural capital is not just nature. So nature is the invaluable side of things, and natural capital is the valuable side. And in that respect, we need to look at both. So we need to be acting on both, which means that all sectors need to come together. We know we need to make a business case for nature, that is obvious, but we also need to remember that enjoying nature and having nature there or over there is not a transaction, it's a perception. And that's the side of things that we need to keep remembering and find ways to work together to bring everyone to work together to be able to address that issue, I think.
Thanks. No, I think that's a really nice way of putting it. I guess behind that question is this tremendous need to make sure we're measuring the right thing, because if we don't measure it, we can't actually influence it in the way we can best. So,
Colin, can I come in on that one?
Absolutely, yes, please do.
Well, I think the other aspect of this, which may not sit necessarily well with everyone, is, but I think, of course, biodiversity is a source of innovation. And if we look at biodiversity, then there are huge opportunities for natural product chemistry. There's a huge opportunity to really rebalance the focus on fossils, fuel-derived areas, but also in terms of developing completely new non-synthetic natural products. So there's kind of also a kind of a big business driver here. Now there's massive issues around the governance of biodiversity and so on, but we shouldn't lose sight of it. That biodiversity is a generator of innovation, and I think we really need to, I think, to reflect on that as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. I would fully agree with that, Wayne. I want to try and move the discussion onto society a bit to make sure we're covering some of the questions here. And a great question from Helen Zealy. I hope I've pronounced that properly, Helen. But how best can action and involvement with deprived city communities be encouraged and supported, particularly for young people? And I think COVID has really brought the plight of young people in a missed year for a whole generation into sharp focus. How do we, and Deborah's talked about this a little bit as well, how do we connect that? We've got this fantastic natural capital in the rural areas, but what about our city centres where there are some real big issues and problems? Maybe Deborah wants to kick off on that. I know you've thought about this previously.
Yeah, I can kick off on it. I was asked a similar question when I gave a presentation about the Infrastructure Commission review. I was asked what would be the biggest thing that would make a difference. And the thing that immediately came into my mind is ensuring that everyone that lives in a built-up area can walk to a green space that's a proper green space, not just, cut amenity grassland, but it's got trees and different types of plants and access to wildlife. So that was my biggest thing. Can we green up our urban areas so that everyone can walk and has easy access to nature and a bit of green space, because that provides the inspiration and the mental and physical benefits of being close to nature.
Yeah, thanks. I would agree with that. I mean, maybe the other panelists might like to come in and particularly comment in terms of employment as well for young people, if that'd be okay. I mean, I know you've all gotten interested in that. Any thoughts on that one?
I mean,
sorry, Joe, you go ahead.
No, go on, Alan, go on.
Alan, please come in, yeah, and then we'll go to
I was just going to say, so one of the things that I was just having a look through the Q&A that we're probably just bordering on here is inequality. We know we're a very unequal nation as it is, and COVID is only exacerbating that, and especially for young people, as I think everybody will know on this call. So I suppose it does pose the question, and it's a difficult one. If you don't have your basic needs met, is this even in your frame of reference to be thinking about, nature and recovery and that sort of thing? And I know it's a challenging thing to say, but if you're literally toiling, hold a job down or put food on the table, that comes first. And yeah, it's a far bigger policy issue for us as a country. You know, we're I think, as many will know, one of the wealthiest nations on earth still. And again, we're talking Dasgupta and far further about a kind of mismanagement of assets and what we value. And this comes back to, I guess, the kind of fundamental point is, you know, what do you value and how do you measure what you value? I think at the moment, you know, national performance frameworks, well-being economies, and these sorts of things are aspirations. They're not a reality, and we don't truly invest and measure properly against them. And that's a very blanket statement, but there are very few places, you know, there's examples of New Zealand and well-being budgets and that sort of stuff, but we have to start measuring more than economic output if we're actually going to change the dial around what we value in society.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'll maybe go to Joe and then Wayne, maybe come to you after that, because obviously that's something that Shruk and others education providers are thinking a lot about in terms of training and skills in particular. Joe, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Alan's made a really good point about inequality there. What I would say just on that is that, you know, there's a recognised correlation between income inequality and health inequalities, but a less recognised correlation between health inequalities and lack of access to good quality green spaces, which is what you know, Deborah was talking about, that access. So I think there's lots of relevant things there. To your point, Colin, about, you know, creating jobs, I think there's some interesting opportunities around vacant and derelict land in Scotland, and there's momentum behind that discussion where we could be investing in skills building programs and apprenticeships to actually give people a stake in the success of you know, the creation of new natural assets in the middle of urban areas. So that would be just an example that springs to mind. Yeah,
with perfect timing there, Hamish Trench posted a comment about derelict and vacant land. Oh, right. So I think there's definitely a fantastic alignment there. If you solve one big problem with one big opportunity, that's definitely an area I would love to hear more big ideas about in terms of derelict and vacant land. Wayne, what about the training and the skills side of that in terms of the future for people wanting a job, sort of green recovery?
Well, I mean, I think if it's just calling on the point about the urban component, I mean, clearly there's a tremendous need at the moment for urban farming, including the work that you're doing in vertical farming and the skills associated with that. But I'd like to pick up another point, if I can, which is really important to this and really important to the green agenda and biodiversity, certainly, and that is mental health. So the whole area of mental health and well-being in both urban and rural surroundings are really critical. And I think that this whole area of the natural capital and is really critical to it. The other factor is if you take a purely a business, look at this through a purely business lens, then there's also evidence that productivity improves when access to green space. So these issues aren't necessarily binary. And finally, of course, there's evidence, I think, from the Bennett Institute in Cambridge, Policy Institute in Cambridge, which I think has shown that properties with green space increase value considerably. Now, I don't think we should be naive about this. We need to understand those motivations that are going to be driving these areas into the future. So I think the mental health agenda, productivity, well-being, and valuing property are all going to be important part in terms of creating the kind of reference narrative which I think we're seeking, Colin, from the conversations we're having.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Right, we've got a good bit of time here for questions and answers. I want to make sure we cover the diversity of questions. The Dasgupta review keeps coming up from a lot of people, and clearly, I think it's absolutely right, great thing to do. But there's a lot of parallels being drawn with the Stern review. How do we use that Dasgupta review to actually make a difference? And it doesn't just end up on shelves again or whatever. Alan and Hannah maybe want to give a perspective on that in terms of how does that address the messages around that we're trying to get across here, particularly from the business community, and whether nature comes first or make money out of nature, or we make money that improves nature. That type of kind of message that's coming across. Hannah, you any thoughts on the impact and the benefits of the Dasgupta review and how it's used?
Yeah, I think it's from sort of conversations that I've been having, and as you mentioned, the parallels with the Stern review, and I think maybe it's a really good opportunity to take that review and wait for the sort of government response on it, and see then how the private sector can sort of replicate and build on lessons learned from things such as wind and solar power in the sort of the biodiversity space and natural environment. And I think, yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to see how those sort of lessons learned can be built on and corrected. And maybe it also goes back to the previous question and looking at how to sort of maximize opportunity coming through from sort of the supply chain that's created by these things, and the opportunity to build sort of internships for young people and build up that kind of that social pillar more at the really early stages from the response, the sort of the response to the review. So yeah, just my thoughts.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Alan, do you see ripples from the Dasgupta review in your area?
I'd like to hope so. I think I've mentioned a few times, you know, that the framing I think is uncomfortable for a lot around asset management, but is quite important. And I think I touched on the fact, you know, the surge in ESG investing is, you know, pretty deafening. The top 200 asset owners last year increased their allocation to ESG by about 77%. So that includes some of the world's biggest pension funds and whatnot. You know, the more money that flows in, the more there is an opportunity to catalyze that into nature-based solutions, rather than, I think you opened with this, Hannah, just talking about reduction of emissions. I think most of the activity I see at the moment is very much talking about net zero targets, not so much the action plans to get there, and not so much how nature is an integral part of that. And then the other point just to mention is we spend a lot of time in those sort of conversations with businesses trying to peel people off just thinking about the E of ESG. You know, what about the business models? What about, you know, social inequality? You know, it is all interconnected. So for me, I think there is a hope in a moment that we can use that as a platform to get a bit more ahead of the game when it comes to financial innovations and products and markets. But yeah, I whether that becomes a reality or not, I don't know, but we're going to have a good bash at it. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. And you know, Bruce has very helpfully put the link to the Dasgupta review in the chat, so if anybody wants to catch up on it. Joe, Deborah, any points on that one that you want to add, or want to move on to another question?
I would just quickly say that if we want the Dasgupta report to achieve the same level of influence as the Stern report, we need to talk about it. We need to be talking about it a lot more than we are. So it's not getting the profile that it needs, but I think that's a key reaction.
Yeah, agreed. Joe, anything on that one? Or
Not a great deal to add. I mean, I think it comes back to the point that I made earlier about the political will. I think we need to use it to help increase the political will to make change happen much more quickly and at a much greater scale.
Okay, thanks. Right, I want to take another question, and this one again is in relation to society and potentially a controversial subject in Scotland, but from Marion Bruce, Director of Highland Boundary Limited. Scotland has the most aggregated land ownership pattern in Europe, which has historically and continues to generate divisions around health, wealth, status and opportunity amongst Scotland's people. Does the panel agree that in order to create a net zero distributed wellbeing economy as part of Scotland's Commonwealth, we need to sort of tackle this issue? Is this one of our barriers? Who wants to go in the land ownership one first? Joe?
So happy to jump straight in there. I mean, from the Scottish Wildlife Trust's perspective, land management is the key. So it's more about how land is managed rather than who owns the land. I think we've got to, however, look at a green and fair recovery. I think that's incredibly important. So engaging communities, giving people a stake in the future is really important. But you have got large landowners doing some quite transformative things ecologically. So for us, it's about what happens on the land and how we manage it and how we work together to deliver a fair range of benefits for everybody.
Yeah, again, you can see it as an opportunity. If there are a few influential people who want to do things differently, then you can actually go much faster, in fact. So it's maybe not necessarily a barrier, although I suspect some people on the ground have met difficulties on that one. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that one? Are we happy to move on? Because I'm keen to try and do as many as we can if possible.
I would just
comment. Oh, sorry, please.
No, you go, Wayne.
No, please go ahead.
I was just going to briefly, there was a question from Paul Walton that came up earlier about how local communities can feel ownership. And I think that's a key point. Joe's point that it's actually about how land is managed, not about who owns it. But if local communities can feel ownership and have a way to be able to influence what happens in their local environment, I think that's one of the key things to tackle. Yeah,
that's a great point. Yeah, Wayne?
Well, I was just going to make a point about the descriptor review, Colin. And I think one of the big opportunities from that is when you have a distinguished economist authoring a report like that, it is such a big opportunity to integrate that into schools and university curricula and really using it as a vehicle for getting that ingrained in much more of the curriculum that students and children are taught. And I think that's a really big lever for potential empowerment going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. So another question that's come up from a number of people, and I don't think anybody mentioned it specifically, is about rewilding and whether really that's a good option going forward in terms of achieving what we want. Again, a lot of different views on this, but who wants to tackle that one in terms of the rewilding ideas that are around? Should we be fully embracing this? I can see you all shrinking back from the camera.
No, I'm happy to jump in straight in there, Colin. I mean, I think rewilding offers so many exciting opportunities. And I think, like everything, it's about how you approach it, because rewilding in some communities is, it's a highly charged issue. And I think that's about the fact that different stakeholder groups' interests are not being taken into account in some of these conversations. So some people don't like the of rewilding because they think it's a bit backward looking, but many people find it, a kind of an inspiring way of kind of reinventing how we relate to the natural world. So I think it's about using the right language in the right place to achieve the aims that are going to benefit all of us, and accepting that in some cases, if that word is going to sow controversy, then let's not use it. But actually, if it's going to help us achieve change, it's about everybody's needs being taken into account, everybody having a stake. Again, just come back to that point.
Yeah. Deborah, did I see you wanting to answer on that one as well?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I absolutely agree with Joe, and really Joe did mention it earlier on, because she started off talking about the decade of ecosystem restoration. That's just another way of saying rewilding. So I think ecosystem restoration is the way we need to go, and if some people prefer to talk about that as rewilding, then that's fine, as long as we're all going in the same direction towards ecosystem restoration.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, there's pure rewilding where you just let it go its own way, or you design the rewilding in a managed way. And I think that's partly where some of the controversies are. Okay, I want to move on.
I think,
sorry, Wayne, yeah.
I'm just, I think this is actually connected to the land ownership issue as well. And I think it's really about, as well, how rewilding is reintroduced and how engaged that process is with communities. So I think there's kind of an issue around both land ownership and rewilding, which touches on values. And I think those things become really, really important. And it's also, I think, important to I guess, reflect on the fact that, rewilding isn't necessarily going to do an awful lot for biodiversity if you manage it in a particular way. So I think there's a kind of a complex set of issues there that need to be unraveled when we talk about rewilding and land ownership. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to move on. We've had quite a few questions around the kind of enabling policy frameworks that we have. So there's been questions about, in terms of the rural context, rural payments, and how do we have a scheme which actually helps us deliver what we want. So I was going to ask the panelists if they've thought about that in terms of, and particularly, how does that affect people who live in the cities? A lot of people think it's all about agriculture and farming, but it's all about delivering a more resilient land for us all. So how do we go about kind of designing the enabling policy going forward, particularly in terms of the rural sector, where there is a sort of incentive schemes for doing certain things, and also but making sure that has benefits for everybody in Scotland, not just in the rural environment. Who wants to kick off on that one? I know Wayne knows a lot about this, but he's thinking I can see. So, Joe, any thoughts on that one?
I think I've been saying too much, Colin. I'm going to
no. Joe, what's your thoughts in terms of we've got a lot of things going in Scotland, land use partnerships. There's a lot of mechanisms to pull levers on here. How do we pull the right levers?
Well, I mean, I was thinking about Wayne's earlier point that, you know, regarding the importance of transforming our food systems, and I do think ending harmful subsidies is a topic that is growing in importance internationally. I would put that top of the list in terms of what needs to change right now, and in terms of how that impacts people in cities. I think the more awareness we can get among people going to the supermarket and coming home and eating the food at their table, you know, in the evening when they sit down together as a family, we need to reconnect people to where food comes from, and that in itself, I think, will build momentum for change when people have a better understanding of those things.
Okay, and Wayne, do you want to?
I think that the whole area of the ag policy at the moment, and the way in which the ag policy is going to be introduced in Scotland, I think is actually a bit of an opportunity for us, but it's really complex. And if you look at what's going on in England with the ELM approaches and so on, and public money for public goods, it is emphasizing the right thing. But in practice, the question is, how do you monitor and measure this? And how do you really have the transparency and the efficient and effective monitoring that is going to enable the taxpayer support for the interventions? So I think it's a very important item. I think it's one certainly that a lot of my colleagues are engaged with at the moment with Scottish Government and your own. But I think it's probably a really important area. I think that the whole area of food from nature, how our uplands are going to be managed, as opposed, in fact, to how the arable parts of Scotland are going to be managed, are going to present both challenges and opportunities for policy intervention. But those ag policy interventions going forward are going to be really, really critical, and it's going to require us to be able to synthesize evidence from different strands. So, pretty important. Okay, thanks. Anybody else want to come on that one? Particularly in terms of, you know, the rural versus urban, and any thoughts on that in terms of how we maybe try and join these things up so they're not seen as being one specific land sector only?
I'm just going to add, Colin, that it's another theme that the Dasgupta review identified. It highlighted one of the key messages is that we invest more in exploiting nature than we do in restoring nature. So that needs to flip. But that doesn't actually answer your specific question, sorry.
No, it does, that's fine. Thank you very much. So we're getting close to the end of the panel question and answer session. And what I want to do, obviously, one of the aim of this event is to try and identify what we see as being the top 5 opportunities. So I want to just give kind of last opportunity to the participants to actually propose if they feel there's something that hasn't been heard yet. Please post that. We want to make sure we capture all the ideas. We're all trying to work together on this and bring things together. But having said that, maybe just go back to the panel in terms of getting their thoughts, having heard the questions, having heard each other. Where would you now sort of summarize the sort of top 5 opportunities? And obviously you may not have 5, but you may have 1 or 2, but what do you think are really the top 5 opportunities for us that kind of move us the longest way and the fastest? Who wants to have a go at that? Joe?
Yeah, no, thanks, Colin. I mean, I think so many really, really good points have been made, and I think there are other issues nested within each of those. But if I think about what's been said by the panelists this morning, I think, you know, Alan's made some really powerful points about the importance of education, and that in it, you know, driving change, I think that's really important. I fully agree with Wayne's comments about, you know, thinking about how we transform our food systems, and that's not straightforward, and needs to take into account all of the nuances of that. The point that you know, Hannah has made about changing how we do transactions on land, and thinking the really interesting point about building models that will generate long-term revenue. I mean, there's a lot of people that have been looking into innovative new forms of finance to help restore nature at the scale we need. And one of the most challenging aspects of those discussions is not about how you attract investment from the financial markets, because as Alan said at the beginning, there's no shortage of money out there. But it's actually structuring things in a way that will deliver a cash flow or a revenue stream that will enable those investors to be repaid. So I thought it was really interesting that Hannah made that point. But of course, I would very, very much support Deborah's point about the importance of a Scottish Nature Network, not least because it's something close to our hearts in the Scottish Wildlife Trust, but because I think in the, you know, increasing pressure on the public purse, it's the most cost-effective way of thinking strategically about this. And you know, when I'm talking about the importance of innovative multi-stakeholder partnerships delivering ecosystem restoration at a landscape scale, that is very much part of that concept of a Scottish Nature Network.
Okay, thanks. We go to Deborah next.
I think the thing that struck me is not so much the what, but the how. So the interesting opportunities that have come up for me have been the ways of working that we've identified. And obviously partnership working and coordination has been a key point of that. I think all the panelists have mentioned that. But then there were also a couple of other interesting ways of working that have been really helpful to me. So Hannah mentioned scalable. So that's, you know, how do we design actions that are scalable? It was a really interesting point for me. Then there was all of the stuff about inequality and access to nature, and how do we improve working at a local level, improving localism, so local communities have a say and feel involved in managing their local natural assets is another key point. And then I suppose what brings all of that together is finding a way to coordinate all of that. And I think that is the biggest opportunity, really. And as I said earlier, I think now is the time. You know, we really do need to get this right now, because the opportunities are there and the push is there as well, not just from, you know, reports like Dasgupta and Stern, but also from younger generations who are saying, we need you to do stuff now. That's my take home.
No, thanks, Deborah. Alan, have you any sort of more reflections on it, having heard the discussions? And
I'm glad you came to me, well, not first, because I scribbled away. So the 5 things I put down, so a compelling and overarching vision with clear actors to lead on each part of it. The competition of visions and all the rest of it is baffling. And I think it makes it much harder to get stuff done. The second point that's closely related is very effective storytelling, education and awareness. Wayne's touched on schools, but equally, you know, universities, embedding into kind of basic business degrees, and critically within businesses. I think ever so briefly, we ran a summit a couple of years ago, and the most popular section was, in terms of a breakout, was peatland restoration from, you know, business leaders across the economy. So if you don't know what you don't know, then we've got an issue. So I would, you know, put a vote for that. Carbon tax and incentives, we haven't touched much on, but, you know, again, a big lever to pull. Catalysing investment I've made quite a bit of. And then the points of acupuncture in a system, you know, if food is a place that brings us all together in an effective way, that's great. What are the others? And I'm sure there's lots, but, you know, identifying them and getting on with doing would be my recommendation.
Yeah, that's excellent, Alan. You've probably just written my summary for me. That's excellent. Well done. Thank you very much. But you do raise an extra point there about the sort of the credit system and also the punitive side in terms of taxation. 2 levers you can pull at the same time. You do get fast action. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about kind of natural capital credits, and that's something I think maybe we could really push forward and show leadership in Scotland if we could come up with a scheme for that. Hannah, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting discussion, and thanks again for having me along in the panel. I think my biggest takeaway is that sort of the chat that I've been hearing on sort of nature-based solutions is sort of like what are the projects that could be coming through as transactions. And just with this sort of short conversation today, there seems to be so many potential projects, whether it's rewilding or ecosystem restoration or sort of tackling the vacant and derelict land as individual projects. And I think that's really sort of, yeah, really interesting to see how those sort of overarching types of projects could be pulled out into individual kind of maybe even small scale and locally owned projects that could be sort of, yeah, invested in and proven, and then you have the opportunity to scale those up. And I think that would be a really interesting way to see this sort of move a bit faster. And I think that, yeah, there obviously is so many project potential opportunities out there, and it's just having a bit of a proven revenue to them, and then, yeah, the money will come.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Hannah. Wayne, I've lost your video, but are you still with us? Yeah.
I am here, yeah. I have been paying attention, I promise.
Yeah, Wayne, any further reflections then, based on what you've heard from others and from the questions and answers in terms of your 5 opportunities?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think this has been a really great session, and thank you, Colin, for chairing it so well and for everyone's contribution. I think I'm not going to go through what everyone else has said. I'll just emphasize a couple of points. I think one is, I think there's also a need for us to look outside. And if we look at food systems, for example, there's a lot of great work going on in adoption of this in many countries around the world, particularly Scandinavian countries and the Netherlands. The second thing I'd reiterate, I think what Alan was saying, the importance of storytelling and the reference narrative, coupled with timing and momentum and making sure we don't lose momentum. I think there's an area which I think we kind of touched on, but perhaps didn't emphasize, is that I think public-private partnerships are going to be really important. And finally, the question of co-design, and I think the importance of having institutional innovation alongside the innovation and knowledge we associate with individuals.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Anybody else want to come back, Deborah? Or... Oh, okay, good. Okay, so we've been through things, and there's a couple of recurring themes. We've captured all of those, and we've captured all of the questions, and all of these will be made available. It remains for me to try and summarise things, and we've got a bit of time just to pick up on a few issues. And there's some really startling things for me here, in the sense that we've got lots of ideas, and we're claiming that there are lots of resources out there, and including from private investors, philanthropy, business. So it's a big task to think about how do we pull all that together, but it is a massive opportunity, and it is incumbent on us to try and do that, I think. And I think one of the things that's coming out for me is around this bigger vision. A lot of people have talked about scalability, national schemes. I'm not fully convinced we have a national vision on this yet. And I think there's lots of elements there that could be that national vision. And I'm wondering what is the best way forward on that in terms of getting, a vision that people can buy into. And I'd be curious to just ask the panelists, if you could be instrumental in getting that to unification of a vision that is adopted as a national vision. And I'm going to put it in this way. Actually, there maybe is a lot of private investors out there, but they're also being approached by Costa Rica and by countries in Africa and Australia and New Zealand. What would be the thing that you would ask them to say why they would want to invest in Scotland over other countries? How would you go about doing that? Anyone have a go at that?
I would probably start with the fact they're here, Colin. We've got, most of the world's investment managers just a few hundred miles south of here, and quite a lot of them, in fact, in and around central Scotland. It's a great place to begin. We've just set up a national development bank, and there could be a lot more that emerges from those assets that are already here anyway. So why be tempted further afield if it's right here? The other thing, very briefly, is I know COP is in some cases a big shiny thing, but it is also a moment in time, and there's a lot of people looking to do something. Quote unquote. So let's use that.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Alan. Joe or Hannah, do you want to come in on that one as well? Why why invest in Scotland's natural capital over others, and how would you get?
I think Scotland has got a fantastic opportunity to be a real test bed. You know, it's known for innovation, and I think what we can offer is confidence to investors and transparency, and you know, the size that Scotland is and the history it's got of innovation. I think that could be a test bed that inspires change way beyond Scotland's borders between now and 2030. So that's, I think, certainly one of the things that I would say to investors.
Yeah, thank you. Hannah, why Scotland?
I don't know if I have anything to add of what Joe and Helen have already said. I think, I know I've mentioned it before, but just seeing sort of Scotland's progress on other sort of climate finance related activity, it marries up well with breaking sort of new ground on the nature-based solutions side. So you've got sort of hubs up in the north of Scotland with wind activity and looking at exciting new things on hydrogen and things like that. So why not add nature as the next big sector?
Yeah, okay, good. And I'll go to Deborah and then Wayne. Deborah.
I think Joe's kind of summed it up really. Scotland's a really good size. You know, we can get stuff done. Everyone knows everyone else. So it means that, you know, we can do this in Scotland, and we've also got the history of innovation. You know, we've demonstrated that, and it's ongoing. The other thing I would just highlight is that although we've got diversity of ideas and diversity of people able to take this on, but we've also got a massive diversity of habitats. You know, we've got mountains, we've got temperate conditions, we've got continental conditions, we've got it all really because of the geographic location that we have. So I think, you know, it's just a good test bed, as Joe said. We've got a lot of things in our favour at the moment for Scotland.
Okay, good. Wayne, any thoughts on that one?
Well, I think you could turn, Colin, to the Jaeger report, and there's a quote from Dieter Helm, which basically is, I struggle to think of anywhere in the world where natural capital is more important to the economy than it is to Scotland. Mm-hmm. So I think we've kind of got a really important soundbite there, and I think an important basis from that Jaeger review to really march forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I've heard other commentators around the world actually talk about the deep wealth of our nation is rather unique, and that our size is really important in terms of doing that. And I think what you're all saying is that we can lead by example, and that's particularly important. And I think what we need therefore is great examples, but we do need that enabling framework and the coordination to make it happen. And that's a message that I think we maybe need to get it through. I do see from my international comparisons that Scotland is leading in lots of ways in terms of a land use strategy which tries to integrate considerations around land use, having a national performance framework where there is an asset index, and you can criticise the index, but it's there, and you know, you're trying to measure against it. So I do think we are leading, but we're maybe not telling enough people that we're leading. That's a reason why we should invest in us. So I think there is a great opportunity. So I've only got 1 minute left, I think. So just, if I can, just take a moment to pause and thank everybody, for our panelists in particular. Thank you. You've worked very, very hard. But also our participants. I've been amazed at the number of comments and questions and pieces of evidence that have been posted there. We're going to capture all of those. We very much hope that you have enjoyed today. This is just the start. We will also share the output from today. And I think I'm looking at Bruce maybe to nod at me here. We will give opportunity for review and feedback on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're hoping to bring together, and myself, Deborah and Rory have been working on ideas of outputs for this, but an infographic that kind of conveys a lot of the ideas here. We'll make sure to save the chat. There's been an enormous amount in there. So yeah, you're right, Colin, we'll be working on an output from this.
Okay, great. And we will use it. We've got everybody's email and contact details, so it'll be via direct contact rather than the website.
That's right. We'll probably go for both, so that it comes as an output in both mediums.
Right. So I'm afraid we are out of time, but thanks also to Bruce and Rory for great backup support today, and a big thank you to me, to everyone for taking part. And let's get on and do something about this. We do have all the elements to make a difference here. So I'm very pleased that everybody's been able to come and offer their ideas. And with that, we'll sign off. And Oh, Bruce, sorry, but you were
sorry, very quickly. Massive thank you from the Scottish Forum to you, Colin, for chairing, and to all the panelists. A really interesting event. And just to pick up on what Wayne said about the mental health aspects, we have got a sort of virtual coffee area put aside. We're going to sort of allow people to come in after they've had a chance to boil a kettle. So Rory and I will keep this window open if anyone wants to stay, but everyone is busy. So if no one wants to stay, then that's absolutely fine. But if anyone wants to stay and chat through some of these ideas, then Rory and I are more than happy to keep that chat window open there.
Can I just check, will the panelists remain, will they be able to join?
No, there's no compulsion for anyone to stay at all. If everyone's busy, we just thought we'd leave that option there. It's a Friday, and we thought people might appreciate it.
I mean, I'll certainly stay online if anybody wants to fire any questions at me or pick up on anything.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, but as I say, no pressure to anyone to stay.
I might go and get a coffee though, but thanks very much indeed. Okay, we'll say goodbye to those who are leaving, and thank you again very, very much. Bye-bye.